John here with the forecast, your forecast for October 2022. I'll tell you, if I were you, the first thing I would do would be to subscribe so you can get weekly forecasts, because I'm going to try to tell you about October, but we're going to have to parse it out week by week as we go along, because there's just too much happening this month. This is not a month where we're going to say it's just like this. It's like this, and then it's like that, and then it's like this. What's going on? We have 5 planets or 4 planets and 1 asteroid changing direction. We have a solar eclipse in Scorpio, no less, and we have some hot planetary aspects. So lots of stuff going on. Now, we start off with Mercury stationing to go direct on Sunday, October 2nd. Mercury is just opposite Neptune. Now, if Mercury stationing is going to cause problems with things like contracts and negotiations and electronics and technology and automobiles, well, imagine we put him opposite foggy Neptune, where the truth just sort of bends and twists according to what seems like it might be good. Not very easy to know what's actually going on. I would say that is true on the 1st, the 2nd, all the way through to the 3rd. You know what we have going on the 1st that's good news, though, is we have a Venus-Jupiter aspect. It's an opposition, but they love each other. So it makes it seem like this would be a good weekend to just kind of have some fun and not take things too seriously. If you can. It's probably your last opportunity to have fun and not take things too seriously in October. Oh, that's nonsense. You don't take things seriously if you don't want to. Okay, so the next thing we have going on is Pluto stationing to go direct on the 8th. Now, Pluto stations tend to get us either into our power or into somebody else's power. These are power times. These are implosive kinds of energy, right? Pluto sort of draws like the sort of pulling inward kind of thing. And sometimes it is pushing outwards, especially with the full moon in Aries, Mars's home sign, a day later on October 9th. So the 8th and 9th, right around that period of time, that's coming up into that weekend, we're looking for this sort of implosive, explosive energy. People like to get their way on Pluto stations. Well, we could say a lot of things about Pluto stations, but one thing for sure is people like to get their way. They want things their way. This is not a cooperative kind of energy. So we got to keep that in mind. Also coming into and out of the Pluto station. I'm not a doom and gloom astrologer. You know that. But when Pluto's stationed to go direct in September of 2008, it was his first station to go direct. It was first station to go direct in Capricorn. We had the financial crisis. That was on that day that all the banks started to, well, the banks lost everything. And the market tumbled and so on. Now, I am not saying that the same kind of thing is going to happen again. However, this is really Pluto's last station, just about last station. It's his last station being fully in the sign of Capricorn. It's going to go into Aquarius. It's a whole story. Anyway, it's not unusual that events bookend each other at the beginning of a sign and at the end of a sign. Now, we're already in the midst of a considerable financial problem. We're already in the midst of a, well, I guess recession is a technical word, which I think we've met the criteria for recession already. But we have gigantic global inflation. We have supply chain problems. We have energy costs going absolutely nuts. We have markets tumbling. So we're already in the midst of a very similar situation. Is it going to get worse? On October 8th, 9th, 10th, is it going to get worse? I don't know. I would sort of, I was going to say hedge my bets, but that's a little bit of a technical term. I would kind of hold in abeyance any big financial decisions until after mid-month. That's one thing that would do on a very practical level. I'm not sure that it's going to be a big disaster. Then again, Pluto is also opposite, well, Pluto is conjunct the US Pluto. We're at the Pluto return 200 and X years later. And that Pluto in the US natal chart is in the second house of finances. So, yeah, I'm not feeling comfy about it. I'm not saying anything terrible is going to happen. I'm not comfy about it. Okay, so we want to get more comfortable. Let's move ahead a little bit. There's a lot of aspects that happen, and we would look to October 23rd. That's the next planetary station, and it's a dual station. Both Saturn, the cosmic timekeeper, and Juno, the partnership asteroid, are stationing to go direct after their respective retrogrades on the same day. What a nice little cocktail. Now, Saturn stations tend to be times when we have a lot of work to do, a lot of responsibilities. It's not a great time to get away and play. It's a time to buckle down and handle things and do what you have to do. You know, there's other times to go have fun and play and stuff like that, but Saturn stations, not usually. Saturn stations, be aware that a lot of times colds and minor illnesses go around at that time. Our immunity gets a little depressed, and it's a little bit of kind of like a, you know, just sort of feeling crappy sort of day. But it's not just the 23rd, you know, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, around there. You know, you can give it some time, give it some space. You have plenty of time to feel a little crappy. Now, Juno going direct would indicate that we are able to sort of, after the 23rd, 24th, we're able to move forward with relationship things that have been stalled for a few months. Is that the case? Maybe. Well, it depends if things have been stalled for a few months, if not, or not. So we'll have to see how that plays out. That's a more individual thing. That's much more the kind of thing that'll affect a few people who are in the midst of some stuff. You know, Mercury is still retrograde, and I can't shut that thing off no matter what I do. The messages keep coming in on my computer. I didn't even set it up. They just come in. So what am I going to do? You know, it's okay. You have a little ding. It doesn't ruin things for you. You know what I mean? It doesn't ruin anything. So obviously it bothers me though. Now, 2 days later, we have the solar eclipse. It's at 2 degrees of Scorpio. This is the sun will have left Libra and gone into Scorpio. And we have this solar eclipse closely conjunct the planet Venus, mind you. Venus and the sun are very close together. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this Pluto station, not the Pluto station, the solar eclipse, it's very like a Pluto station. It is almost everything I said for the Pluto station goes for the solar eclipse, except for the business about the financial stuff. But perhaps it will involve financial stuff. The solar eclipse in Scorpio is, again, an implosive kind of energy, right? We often have to wait weeks, months to see what happens with an eclipse, to see it manifesting. On the other hand, we also sometimes see things a little bit beforehand. This eclipse is angular. It's above or it's below or it's on the horizon, among other places, Germany and Italy. And it'd be interesting to see what happens in those places, particularly since Italy's recent election and the far right premier was of Italy. So that's a big shift to the right, and we'll see what the consequences of that are. This eclipse is this eclipse is also quite powerful through Southeast Asia, touching on Sumatra and Indonesia, going up through Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, and then angling out into Siberia, essentially, where the eclipse is strongest, because that's where it's visible. You can see it there. You can see it from Eastern Europe and farther west as well, but that's the maximum point. Now, you know, logic would say that not much happens in Siberia, but Siberia is attached to Russia, and there we go. So we'll have to see what happens in those places, or we can see what happens in those places. Also in South America, the lines go through Ecuador, then up through far northern Colombia and Panama. So we'll see what happens with those places, and it even touches the maritime provinces of Canada and the absolute easternmost tip of Maine, the state in the United States. We'll see. I'm telling you, we'll have to see. We're going to forget about it by the time the eclipse comes, you know. That's what's going to happen. I'm not going to come, if something happens in Maine, I'm not going to even remember to come back here and say, wow, I told you. Anyway, we have to wait for things to unfold from the eclipse. It's a new moon. Not a lot happens at the new moon. Not a lot happens at the eclipse. It happens afterwards. You have to sort of keep an eye on things. There's always something to keep an eye on, though. Very hard to keep focused on this sort of stuff. You know, in the old days, you had astrologers like William Lilly, you know, predicted the Great London Fire. But he only had to predict for London. He only had to look at one place and say, well, let's see what's happening here. Now we have to go all over the world. It gets a lot more complicated. Anyway, sometimes we pull off a good one. Sometimes we don't even remember that we've done it. Obviously, if you're in the United States, all of this is happening just in advance of Election Day. And in fact, coming into November, the tense energies, including a lunar eclipse, will maintain through November. The last major incident, the last major celestial happening this month is Mars stationed to retrograde on the 30th. Now, there's a separate video out about Mars retrograde, and you can go listen about what the retrograde is likely to bring, the do's and don'ts of Mars retrograde. Just as Mercury has its do's and don'ts, so Venus and Mars have their do's and don'ts when they go retrograde. And this time it's worthwhile to learn about Mars retrogrades. Basically, not a great time to begin new projects of just about any kind. It's not great for sexual relationships. It's not good for exercise programs and athletics and things like that. You can resume, but it's not great to initiate. That's already true at the beginning of the month, though, because Mars is in what we call the shadow of his retrograde. He's walking forward over the area he's going to walk backwards over during his retrograde. So already you're there. It'll just be more pronounced when Mars is retrograde. But right around the 30th, let's say again, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, we get that martial energy. You know, Plutonian energy is an implosive energy. Mars is not so implosive. Mars is very much a go forward kind of planet, even when he's stationing to retrograde. In other words, people are liable to be irritable and cranky and a little bit combative right around the end of October. There's a sort of combative sense to things. And I would, you know, it's Halloween or All Saints Day or Dia de los Muertos. And no matter how you think about it, it is known actually for a time, sort of like the portals between the worlds opening, as they say. Samhain, I don't know how to actually pronounce that one. It's always, it doesn't pronounce like it's spelled, but the pagan holiday. There's a lot of stuff. Pagan's okay to say, right? I mean, it just, I think it's Druid, but I don't want to be wrong. And there's nothing wrong with being pagan. Okay, so keep that in mind, right? This is a very hot time. There's liable to be some contention and stuff like that towards the end of October. So what are your strategies for this month? Well, one thing is don't multitask. Don't multitask. Mars is in Gemini, and Mars in Gemini is a multitasker. Wants you to multitask. We feel that we can do a lot of stuff. We feel we could do two things at once. We feel we can juggle things, keep everything up in the air. But he's stationing to go retrograde, so don't. This is not a bad time to tackle projects one at a time. Things are liable to go kind of slowly. There's liable to be setbacks and so on, but it should be fairly reasonable to go forward and make progress. That Saturn station is going to help. The Pluto station and then going direct doesn't hurt. The solar eclipse doesn't really have much to do with that. So you can do stuff, just don't multitask. There's a kind of, you think you're juggling balls and it turns out that they're knives kind of feeling about this. You know, you can have stuff up in the air and it winds up being sharp. It could cut you. Not literally, probably. But you know what, with Mars, again, right around the station, but with Mars retrograde in Gemini, you want to be careful driving. You want to watch out for anger while people are driving. Road rage is a real possibility, especially at the end of October. So doing one thing at a time, not taking stuff for granted, going, you know, in pace with things. You're going to get through October just fine. You're going to accomplish stuff. You might have a great time. There's some good aspects going on. Oh, I wanted to talk about Venus and the Sun. Well, for most of the month, Venus is ahead of the Sun in the zodiac, which means she rises as the morning star. Now, Venus is typically thought of as the goddess of love and relationship and things like that, aesthetics. But when she rises ahead of the Sun, when she's the morning star, Venus is actually associated with war and things like that. It's sort of considered to be kind of a belligerent sort of placement of Venus. We've sort of forgotten about that. That's an old-timey astrology thing. It's also, I believe, a Mesoamerican astrological thing. So the relationship aspect of Venus, though she be in Libra for most of the time, is sort of a little bit more on the back burner. What I see there is that Libran energy is going to come out in terms of hard negotiation. It's going to come out in terms of some tense diplomacy. Now, that's certainly true on the world stage. Those guys, and most of them are guys, those folks are always kind of messing stuff up with hard diplomacy. But in our personal lives, we're likely to come across the same thing too. Coming to an agreement on things, whether it's a business agreement, whether it's social plans, whether it has to do with romance and so on, is likely to have a lot of stress associated with it, with Venus ahead of the Sun and all this other stuff going on. Then on the 22nd, just a day before Venus leaves for Scorpio, which doesn't make things much better, by the way. As Venus leaves for Scorpio, she falls behind the Sun, and again, she'll be too close to actually rise, but she'll be the evening star after that. And that kind of pushes things back into the realm of Venus signifying love and romance and all of those wonderful things, beauty. Particularly around the 22nd, when the Sun and Venus are together and square Pluto, watch out. Even more than the weight of the Saturn station, which is heavy, even more than the Pluto station before it, or the eclipse that's just ahead of it, this period of time is likely to be very tense, or not just tense, it's liable to be kind of hairy. So we're going to watch that period of time, the 22nd all the way through the 25th, and essentially the entire end of the month, looking for things to kind of pop out. And as I said, then Venus goes into Scorpio, where she gets to eventually be the evening star in a sign that she's not really crazy about being in. Okay, that just means that folks could be a little irritable, and, you know, your folks too, could be a little irritable, could be a little demanding, could be having a little bit of power struggles as the month wraps up and comes to an end. You could still do stuff. You can still have a good time. It's not going to affect everybody. You know, if it doesn't really hit stuff in your chart and stuff like that, you'll probably be fine. Not so bad. But, you know, even if you're okay and you're not feeling particularly tense or bad about things, still in all, you're going to be dealing with folks, and some of them are going to have all of this stuff going on. So, you know, give other people a wide berth and take a little bit for yourself too.